Hello everyone, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about books and book formats and the pros and cons of each different reading format, because I know that there is a lot of discussion about the best ways to consume your reading and how it's very specific to each person. So I thought that this would be a cool topic to touch on, and kind of just wanted to discuss what I think about each of the formats that you can consume a book in, and just talk about like what I like and what I don't like, and maybe overall which one of them is my favorite. So up until last year, I had only read from physical books, and I had not yet dove into the world of ebooks and audiobooks. And they are great because they provide so many options that you can have 3 formats that you can consume a story in. And I just thought that since I am relatively new to trying out these other formats, that it would be good to talk about like what my experiences have been so far and what my thoughts are. So I'm going to start with physical books and going to go through the pros and cons of that option. So in terms of the pros, physical books still feel like the authentic reading experience to me. I don't think that the pros of physical books really have to be like expounded upon too much, because they still are, as much as the landscape has changed, physical books still are the touchstone, they are the original, and I don't think that they are ever going anywhere. And I think that part of that for me is because I love collecting books, and I love to like organize my shelves and look at the books on my shelves, and it's a different feeling for me to add something, to go to the store and buy a book and like browse the shelves and add something to your collection. That's a feeling that I love, and I think that that is one of the parts of the kind of like authentic reading experience feeling. Like I also love the feeling of having a book in your hands and flipping through the pages. You can physically see your progress as you read it and progress through a book, and all of those are such great feelings for me. They're the kind of things that like give me the warm and cozy feelings associated with reading and associated with like bookstores, and so all of that is just like really a positive for me, which is why I still love physical books and why I still collect them. But of course there are cons to physical books as well, and the reality of it is that if physical books were perfect and the only way to go, then there would have been no reason for people to expand into other formats of books, because they just wouldn't have needed to. But obviously the demand was there, and it was there for a reason. So there are 3 things that I came up with as cons for physical books, and these aren't groundbreaking by any means, but physical books can be expensive. And so I have obviously bought my fair share of books, but that tends to be like a choice that I'm actively making to spend my money on that. If you are like tight for money, and obviously there are a lot of expenses that are like going way up now, like in terms of the cost of living, and it's not always going to be easy to, you know, drop like $25 to $30 Canadian on a book, or even more than that on a hardcover book. So that is a very real thing, that physical books are quite expensive, at least in Canada they are. And then the next one is that you need lots of space to store physical books, and like I mentioned in the pros, I do love having that collection and having them on my shelves, but you run out of space for physical books. You would need to be constantly expanding your shelves and the space that you have to keep them if you are going to be like keeping everything that you buy and not paring it down ever. So that's just the reality of it. Like, they are heavy to move, they take up space, like, you know, that is just what happens when you have like hundreds of a thing in your room. And then the third one is that while physical books are the perfect reading experience for me, like to actually sit down and read them, on the other hand, they are harder to take places and harder to bring on the go, whereas like you might be able to fit one physical book in your purse or whatever it is. You're maybe worried about it getting damaged. You're worried about like shoving it in there and having it actually fit. You're worried about like carrying it around with you, stuff like that. So it is harder to bring them places, and they're not very mobile. I mean, they are. It's obviously not like that hard to just bring a book with you if you're going somewhere, but it doesn't have quite that same convenience factor. So physical books still make up most of what I buy, but let's move on to ebooks, which I personally think make up the smallest chunk, but they are gaining traction, I hope, for me. I'm trying to read more ebooks. So in terms of ebooks, the pros that I thought of are basically in direct contrast to what we just talked about with physical books. Ebooks, on the other hand, are very easy for on the go and very easy to take with you. You can have an entire library on your Kindle app on your phone, and you can be reading any one of those books that you want, which is a very cool thing. Like there is just objectively something so awesome about that, where you don't even have to have anything extra that you wouldn't have had with you. You know, you have your phone in your pocket or in your purse or whatever, or even if you have a Kindle or like an iPad or whatever it is that you read on, most likely it's going to be easier to bring that with you somewhere than it is going to be bringing like an actual book. Plus, you know, you bring one actual book and it's bigger than all of the options that you have like in Kindle or in your library app or whatever it is. And so in relation to this, not the same point, but similar, is my second pro for ebooks, which is that they don't take up space. So for me, this is less about bringing them somewhere, but it does also apply to that, and more about the fact that they don't take up actual space on your shelves. You can have a collection of books, and if you, say, move a lot and have to pare down your collection a lot, or if you just don't want to have a physical collection in the first place, then ebooks are a great option for that, because of the fact that, well, because of the obvious fact that they are not taking up physical space. And then my last pro for ebooks is that they are often cheaper than physical books. And that's not always the case, but in my experience, you are much more likely to find some good deals on Amazon for Kindle books than you are for physical books. So that can be really, really great if you want to try out a series or try out a book. And, you know, if you're able to get it for like $1, then maybe if you're someone who likes physical books as well, you decide that you like that, and then you want to add it to your collection. So it is a little bit risk reduced, I guess, where you are able to hopefully try more things because you are not putting so much of your money just into dedicating it to one book, but you can maybe buy more things for the same amount of value. But then on the other hand, in my opinion, this is very fair because you shouldn't have to pay as much for an electronic copy as you should for a physical copy, because of course when you buy a physical copy you are getting an item that you actually own instead of something that is in like Kindle's database or something that you own, but like if something were to happen to that information, it could be gone. I mean, that's very pessimistic of me. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but in that sense, of course, it should be less expensive, in my opinion. So moving on to the cons for ebooks, some of these are basically very specific to me and my opinion on the reading experience, and the major one is that I forget about books on my Kindle shelf because they're out of my sight. Of course, I can open the Kindle app and I can look at them, but in comparison to the books on my shelf that I can just turn around and look at, I'm much more aware of them all the time. Like the fact that I want to read something and I can like literally see it on my shelf. Whereas if I buy something on Kindle and then I forget that it's there, and then eventually I'll open the Kindle app and be like, oh my god, I wanted to read that and I forgot that I even had it. That is continuously happening to me, and I'm trying to get better at it. but it's just a reality for me. It just does happen, and so that is definitely a con of ebooks for me. And then another thing that bothers me personally is that you can't necessarily have the edition of a book that you want even though you've bought it, because like Kindle can change the cover. And this isn't a huge deal, but it is something that I don't like, because when I'm looking at physical books, I'm looking at what I want on my shelf and what I want to own, like the specific edition of a book that I would like to own, because I like to make my shelves look nice. But on Kindle, I've noticed a couple of books have changed covers. Like, for example, I have The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, and I noticed that my nice little cover of it, like the original cover, got replaced by the movie poster cover on Kindle. It just updated one day, and I was like, well, I don't want the movie poster cover. That's why I didn't buy the movie poster cover. So you have no control over that, which I don't love. And then another con for me personally is that you don't get the physical sense of making progress through a book. Like, of course it tells you what page you're on, or it tells you what percentage you are through, but when you're holding an iPad or holding your phone, you're flipping through and it's like one page is the same after another. Whereas when you're holding a physical book, you can tell, because, you know, there are a certain number of pages and you've read so many of them. I like that physical feedback while I'm reading a book. That's just my personal preference. I do find it harder to read off of a screen than off of a physical book, because if I'm on my phone reading and then I get a notification, that will distract me. I won't always check it, but it will distract me and pull me out of the book a little bit, whereas if I'm reading a physical book, you know, it's a separate entity. I'm not looking at my phone while I'm reading it. And then the final thing that I wanted to mention is that on occasion, ebooks will be just as expensive as a physical copy of the book, and I hate that. So I'm not going to dive into that too much, because I do think that it's something that doesn't happen very often, but sometimes I see an ebook for like $25, and I genuinely think, why would I buy that if I can have the physical copy for the same amount? On the whole, I think that ebooks are like great for a lot of reasons, but I tend to gravitate towards books that I'm not as invested in for ebooks, because if there are books that I am more invested in, I tend to want them in a physical copy. And then finally, let's move on to audiobooks. And audiobooks are relatively new to me. They are the newest format, because I believe that I listened to my first audiobook in December of 2021, and I've been really enjoying myself with them. So this is, like I said, the newest format for me, and it does have a ton of pros. The first one that I came up with is that audiobooks help me allow myself to mood read. And this ties in directly with the second point, which is that they help me with my genre diversity. And that is because I am listening to non-fantasy books on audio. And this allows me to focus more on the things that I neglect, because in my physical books, and even in the books that I just buy, I gravitate towards fantasy. Like, there are a ton of classics, literary fiction, etc. that I want to read, and they are on my wider TBR, but I just don't tend to gravitate towards those. So the fact that I can have my library app, and then I can look at audiobooks that are available on there and look at some of the non-fantasy books that I've been excited about and access them that way, is really helping me to read them, because I'm able to create that division between what I do with audiobooks and what I do with physical books, and then they're complementing each other really well. Another pro for me is that a good audiobook narrator capturing the voice of a character in a really, really good way just adds another layer that I think is really underrated, where you are hearing the story, allowing you to immerse yourself in it so much more than you would with just words on a page. And I think that's really cool, because this might be specific to people like me, where I don't visualize while I read. I've never been able to do that. I don't think in images. I don't visualize what's being described to me. So the words need to be chosen in such a way that I can say, okay, yes, I know what's being described to me, and I can almost see it. I think that that's one reason why, is because when I am listening to an audiobook, I am getting like audio feedback on what a character sounds like, and it's adding another layer than just the words. And then my next pro is a little bit similar, although it is different, and that is that audiobooks are great for atmospheric books because of the fact that, again, you are immersing yourself in the setting with another level. Instead of just the words, you are having it read to you, and sometimes there are even like sound effects added that are giving you even more about what you're supposed to be picturing and where you are. And so I think that that is really great. Like, those are kind of the two sides of that pro, is like characters and setting. So I do think that that adds a lot to an atmospheric book. And then finally, and honestly, I think this is the main perk of audiobooks for most people, and that is that they are great for being able to read while you are commuting or doing chores or cooking or, you know, going for a walk, etc., etc. So that is how I've been fitting more reading in, and I absolutely love that, is because I have started a job, so I have obviously started commuting to work. So, you know, instead of just listening to music, which some days I still do because I love music, but I'm able to have that time to put on an audiobook. And when I go for a walk, obviously I'm not going to be walking with a physical book in front of my face because that's a recipe for disaster for me. I am able to still read, and so I love that. I think that that's really, really great, and I think that the reason that that's a main perk for so many people is that, of course, once you enter like adult life and gain more and more responsibilities, you have less time to just sit down and read a physical book. So that really is amazing. So I still do have a few cons for audiobooks, even though on the whole I have been really, really liking them. And the first one is that it is harder for me to keep my focus constantly on an audiobook. I'm getting better, but I will find myself zoning out or thinking about something else and realizing that I have missed something. So I know that some people listen to audiobooks on like 2 times speed. I usually find myself falling around 1.4 to 1.6, depending on the actual speed that the narrator narrates at, because any faster than that and I am not processing. So because of this, I can't listen to complex prose or fantasy books because of like the names, world building, etc. Like all of these words that you have to be focused to get. I need to see how they're spelled on the page in order for my brain to absorb that information. So that's another reason why this helps me with my genre diversity. This is both a pro and a con, because I am able to listen to like contemporaries with no issues because there are no words that I'm not going to know what they are if I hear them instead of see them, if that makes sense. Another con of audiobooks is that I don't want to pay for like a subscription service or really buy most audiobooks because I don't think I would listen to them more than once. I think it's unique in that way where for me an audiobook is sort of like a one-time experience, and if I really love it, then I would buy a physical copy so that I could have it in my collection. And so the flip side of that is that audiobooks don't have a place in my physical collection, which for me is a con. And then finally, my last con for audiobooks is that sometimes hearing a character's voice is really cool, and other times the way that a narrator approaches doing the voices for different characters can make characters very annoying. And one book in particular that I think of when I think of this is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, because on the whole, I think the narrator did a fantastic job because she had to narrate a ton of distinct individual voices. And on that note, I think that she did a good job. But there were a few characters where I think if I was reading in the physical copy, I would have been okay. But in the audiobook, they were driving me up the wall. And that's just a reality of audiobooks, where you cannot impose your own voice on the characters. You are being given a voice for them. So that can either be a really good thing or a really bad thing, just depending on the approach. So now that I've gone through all of that, I kind of just want to say that while physical books are still my overarching choice and my favorite, I am really just glad that all of these options exist, because I think that in a lot of ways they complement each other really well, and I'm really grateful to have them. And I think that it's awesome that these books represent accessibility to books for more people. And I just think that that is such a great thing, and I think that it will only continue to grow. Like, most books that come out now come out in all three formats, and I really like that, because even though I have my personal opinions about what I prefer, I wouldn't want to impose those on other people. So I'm glad that everybody, for the most part, has the opportunity to pick whichever one they want to read and how they want to consume their stories. So I think that that's all I have to say. I hope that you were interested in hearing my thoughts about each main format of book, and I honestly really liked writing my notes for this video, because I really liked exploring why I like what I like about each one of them. So please let me know what you think down in the comments. Like this video if you liked it. I have information about my Discord and socials in my description, and I post new videos every Monday and Thursday. So I will see you in the next one, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!